Good afternoon, and you're very welcome. At my home, I'm sitting maybe in a different position. It's hot, 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 and you're very, very welcome. Happy Father's Day to all of you. I'm delighted to be able to express that. And there are, on our age, of course, you see more and more in social media, Happy Heavenly Father's Day. And I'm no different than all the rest of you, of course, remembering my father on this day. It's the Father's Day. She said, I don't remember much of him when he was alive back in Dublin on Father's Day. I don't know if it was a big thing back in Ireland. I can't remember. Of course, I only got to know my father after I was born. I jest. But my earliest memories of my father, was that I very quickly I got to know he was a doctor. He was born in Dublin. His parents, his father came from Riga, Latvia area. It was then Russia, and he came as an immigrant. I think he thinks he was going to America, but he ended up in Dublin anyway. And he built up a very big business there in finance. So he died when my father was only 13, and one assumed that my father and his brother Neville would go into the business, as this leaving a very handsome business. But honestly, I'm not sure of this part of the story, but he met my mother at a very young age. I think they were kids, 12, 13, they met, both of them. And my mother encouraged him to watch his education all the time. My mother was very, very, I don't want to say the word clever, but was certainly very, very involved in her future, that she wanted to be a doctor, and that was it. And so she sort of influenced my father into the same thing. In fact, my mother got into university. She was too young to go into pre-med, and she had to wait. But I'm going to say the long and short, I hate that word, but my father became a doctor and his brother became a doctor. The business was put to a side, and that was that. So my earliest memory was that my father used to take me on house calls on Sunday. In those days, the doctors went from house. You know that. Hello, doctor. Yeah, I'm coming around now. So my father worked very hard. He went to surgery in the morning, I think at 10 till 12. Then he did house calls. Then he had a quick lunch. Then did house calls, or went back to surgery till 5. Then he came back home for a quick bite, and he'd go back to surgery for an evening surgery and do house calls. But on Sunday he did house calls. You remember the house calls, of course you do. And anyway, he would take me with him. I was only a little chap. He'd take me because, but a lot of his practice was working class, high rises. The few things I do remember, he had a very nice car for Ireland standards. He had a Jaguar. And normally you wouldn't go into one of these high-rise flats now with a Jaguar, or you might come out and all you might have is a steering wheel. But it was the doctor's car. And God forbid anyone would go near the doctor's car. They would give it a little bit of a polish, but they wouldn't go near the doctor's car. Now I think in the high rises you'd need 4 policemen to go in there just if you want to visit someone. But but he used to bring me in, and they would, oh, there's the doctor. There you are, little boy. Would you like a little there? Here you are, a little bit of biscuit or whatever. And I remember one thing was very outstanding, or in my memory, is that a lot of these things, because it was Sunday, would have bacon frying in the kitchen, and I couldn't stand the bloody smell of it. It would stick to you, But that was sort of my early memories of my father. But there was a lot of other things that my father got involved with. He was very close to me at a young age, but like a lot of most fathers, I had, my next in line was Vanessa, my sister, then next in line was my brother Gary, and then next in line was my youngest of all, Jane. We were 4, 2 boys, 2 girls. But somehow, I'm not going to say I was the favourite, but I was the eldest. So my father looked after, brought me around with him. So he wanted me, he loved animals. And I've heard a story about him during the war. Where he lived, very close to where he lived, was a very big bread company, a bakery. They delivered bread. Do you remember they used to live? Well, you probably don't remember, but they used to have a horse-drawn carriage. Johnson, Mooney, and O'Brien. I used to love looking at it because I used to see the cowboy things. And I used to see the guy coming up in the horse-drawn carriage. big carriage with the bread. And seemingly the Johnson William O'Brien was bombed or it went on fire during the war, and my father ran in and started taking the horses out. He was absolutely mad about animals, absolutely mad about animals. Now, just going forward a bit, you might think, because the photographs that are on my social media today, on my Facebook, show my father out hunting. He would never, ever hunt an animal. He did what's called drag hunting, and that doesn't mean he had to dress like me and drag. No, they did what's drag hunting is when the drag huntsman would go out very early in the morning and drag a dead animal around miles, and then the hounds would follow it, and they would jumping all over the fence. My father loved that, and anyway, so that was sort of my early memories. But then before he took up riding, I took up riding. I was in boarding school, and riding was part of a thing. And he eventually bought me a pony called Bess, a lovely grey. I wasn't that keen. I want to tell you now, I wasn't that keen on riding. But like some kids, go and learn the piano or go and learn your violin. My father was a little forceful with me on the horse. And the problem with the horse, Bess, was that Bess would see a fence and then take off like a rocket towards the fence and then would shy. But I would go over the fence, and I would really hurt myself. My father said, "Get up there and get back on your horse." And he was like that. And when I was in boarding school, I played rugby, and I loved playing rugby. In fact, I was the captain of rugby. I was in prep school, so I was under 13. But if I was injured at all, my father would come over and say, come on, back on the field. He wouldn't stand for any of that sort of stuff, unless, of course, I was dying. But he was a very, very good father. But he then took up riding because I was riding, and he then became not the master of the hunt, but what's called the whip of the hunt. I think the master went first, and I don't know very long, and he was second behind the master with the hounds, the whip. Whip the hounds, but they had a crack, and that's what he did. But then I took up sailing, and I never forget it. I remember going to the Royal St. George Dunleary Yacht Club, and I made friends with a few people. They used to take me out on boats called Farflies. They were little, I think they were called Farfly, little tiny yachts, and they would have races in the harbour. I loved that. And one day I asked the commandant of the club, I'd like to become a member. And my father was also the doctor for the Royal St. George. But all these other kids that I used to knock around, you might hear a helicopter now, there's one flying out there over the Mediterranean. So I went to the guy and said, could I become a member? And he looked at me, I'll never forget this, and there's another memory. He said, no, you can't. You're always welcome here, Morris, but you can't become a member. I said, why is that? He said, he was very embarrassed. He says, it's because you're Jewish. I'm what? It's because you're Jewish. And I was told, I never heard any anti-anything. Never. And I said, why is that? And he said, no Jew can actually become members here. I must tell you a quick story about that. Groucho Marx, you remember Groucho Marx? He was in Beverly Hills at the golf club, and he used to bring his son up to the swimming pool in the Beverly Hills Golf Club, and he would have a swim. And one day a guy came up to him, a guard or something, he said, Mr. Marx, I'm very sorry, but this pool is for private members only, and you're not a member. I said, well, I'll become a member. Well, I'll become a member. Remember Groucho Marx? And he said, no, I'm sorry, you won't become a member because we don't allow Jews to become a member. Oh, he said, well, my son is half Jewish, so can he get into the water up to his waist? So I was I didn't know that story then, but there are many stories like that, funny stories. Well, they're not so funny. So I was really upset about this. And I remember saying to my father, why? And my father, I think, resigned as doctor to the yacht club, I think. We're talking about when I was injured, horse riding or injured playing rugby. The Farflies would go over in the water, and then you'd have to get on the keel to up. Anyone who sails would know what I'm talking about. And my mother used to have seizure. She said to my father, "Look, he's in the water there drowning." He said, "Would you ever shut up? He's got a life jacket. He's fine." So it was always like that. Even when I learned to water ski, my father was in the boat in front with my mother, and over I would go, and she'd go mad, "Get him out, he's drowning." He's not drowning, he's got a life jacket on. So that's sort of early memories of my father. And then when I sort of became a teenager, he tried to join in things that I was doing. You know, I'd be with the girls and the boys, us teenagers on the horses, going and galloping over the fields and into a sort of area, and we'd all get off the horse and maybe have the odd cigarette. They had no funny cigarettes then that I knew of. And we'd have an odd cigarette. And the next minute you see in the distance, in the horizon, like a cowboy, galloping over the fields is my father. He wanted to join us. Bless him. And the same with sailing. You know, he wanted to get involved, wanted to be with us, you know, all the time. And then it came to the point when I wanted to open my first, when I saw this discotheque idea, and I went to him for money, and I said, "Dad, I want to open a discotheque." And he said, "What's a discotheque?" And I told him, and he said, "It's not getting money off me. That's ridiculous. No band, people play records, it'll never work." I've told this story before, so I'm not going to tell it anymore. But anyway, I opened the Club Elizabeth's, and my father, again, became very active in involving all these sort of the wealthy people in Dublin, getting them down there. He was extraordinarily supportive. And the exact same in the band. You know, he wanted me to be a doctor like any kid, but when he realized that music and entertainment was what I wanted to do, he would then support the band. You know, he would come to gigs, all these teenagers, and my dad at the back of the gig. And I remember once we did our very first television show. It was called the Showband Show in Dublin, in RTE. RTE is the Radio Television Ireland. It's like the BBC of Ireland. It's owned by it's a governmental thing. And I remember Brendan Boyer was on that show, I remember, you know, the Hucklebuck. And I remember my father caused a bit of a nuisance with him. He went up to the control area, you know, the producers or directors, and he wanted more camera on me, and they eventually had to say, "Doctor, you need to have to get out of here." But he was phenomenally supportive. And even when the decision was made, when the children, oh my God, when his grandchildren were born, Nicholas first, and along came Justin, and then Daniel, he was amazing. Would always turn up at my house just to be with the kids, non-stop. And then eventually he called me one day and said to me, would I like to go to the hospital with him? Now, he would never. Why? I assume he was going to see some patients. I said, "Why do you want me to come to the hospital?" He said, "We can have a chat." And now, like, I was married at this stage and we had the kids at this stage. And I said, "Of course I'll join you." We would row quite a bit on points of view. And then, of course, love would override all of that in the end. But I went to the hospital with him. In the car, he said to me, "Please don't tell your mother that I think, you know, I've got TB, tuberculosis." And I hadn't a clue what that was. And I said, is it serious? And he said, "Yeah, it can be, but I'm going there and just want to check it is, and then we'll get it. So we'll get a situation, get it right." And we went to St. Vincent's where he had an x-ray. And I remember he came out and he was sort of snow white. And he said to me, "I've got the big C here." And I said, "Oh my God, well, we better get it fixed quickly. What medication are they giving you?" And he said, "Well, I have to see the surgeon." And I went with him to see the surgeon. The surgeon was a very young surgeon. And he said with me, I was sitting there, he said to me, "Doctor," it's not to me, doctor, to my father. He said, "It's unoperable. It can't be operated on. And you don't have that long, 6 months maybe." But bless him, my father lived for about 2 years after that. And honestly, he was a very handsome guy. He was an extremely handsome guy. And he went from that to looking a bit like Gandhi, bald, very yellow, very stooped. And you know, he would still carry on the best he could until the very end. He was a fighter. He was out hunting in Galway, and the horse in front of him kicked out and broke, is it called the tibia in your leg, and the bone came, oh my God. And he was a year, it aged him immediately. He was a year with his leg sticking out in front of him, but yet he still went to surgery and still went to the patients, never gave up. Not for a second. And he was very involved in gadgets. He had the first telephone, private telephone in his car as a doctor, etc., etc. But I remember we have sitting shiva, it's called, when a person dies, we have a week in the house and we sit in little black stools and people come and we have prayers and they give their condolences, etc. I never liked that idea. I thought it was a bit gruesome. But I must say that so many people came to our home in Mount Merion in Dublin after my father had died to give their condolences to my mother and the family. I mean, they were all his patients, queues and queues of them coming in. Oh, doctor. He was a doctor to a lot of families for a long, long time, to the mother, to the daughter, as they grew up, to the grandchildren. He was a doctor to a lot of these people. And so there was literally non-stop. My mother was so busy, soothing things down. Oh, the doctor, he had a good life, and trying to soothe, oh, I can't live without the doctor, I can't live without the doctor, and all this. By the time the week had passed, things had moved on. And I'm just thinking, if we hadn't said Shiva, then, or a wife, a non-Jewish wife, would go home and the house would be empty. Friends would come around and everything. But it was so busy that week, with so many people coming in. And then there was morning prayers at 7 in the morning and prayers in the evening. So it really kept my mother very occupied during the time. I don't think they'd been together since the 13, 14-year-olds. You can imagine the loss in her life. It was a great loss and a great shock to everyone. He was only in his 50s. When I came here to Marbella, he was already sick. He was sick. When it came, my mother knew, and came close to the end. I went home. I went home, of course, to visit him quite a few times, but he was dying, and everything he loved, horses and sport and sailing and everything, and in those days they didn't have palliative home care, and that's why I got involved with Kudeka in memory of my father and the extraordinary fight that he put up. Extraordinary. I think there's a tile on the wall dedicated to my father. Remember, I put the roof on Kudeka. It's the cancer hospice here. I helped build it. I didn't help build it, I helped raise the funds for building it. So that's the story of my father. I'm sure all of you out there have a story to relate. And if you feel like relating something, this will go up on my social media. You can write something underneath about your father. I met many of your fathers since I've been here, the long time that I've been here. And it's a time of reflection. Have a good day, and thanks for joining me today.